Alrighty, I believe at this point a transition to credits. Come on. There you go. Alrighty, there we are. It's over. For a second time anyway, but for the last time most likely. I can always jump back in if I need any more footage and whatnot, but given that I've got, hundreds of hours of this stuff, I suspect I won't need to jump back in anytime soon. So, given that this is the last that I'm going to be speaking on this game for a while, especially since this will likely release, especially given when this will release, well, it's been interesting to look at in that regard, because it feels very much like a tale of two games. It feels like there's a lot that works really well, and a lot that just cuts it off at the knees. From a gameplay standpoint, it feels like it's you operating out of the same notebook that Three Houses used, which is gonna sound like a weird comparison, but let me put it to you this way. The whole difference for Fire Emblem Three Houses and what made it distinct from other Fire Emblem games is the fact that they gave you a ton of customization options. You start off fairly generic at first, and then you can branch out and do all sorts of crazy stuff with your characters if you so desire. Throw them into all sorts of novel classes, throw them into all sorts of novel specialties. And they do have options that are more guided, that they're more, they will do better if you go in that direction. But for the most part, you are given the freedom to mix and match however the hell you want. And Xenoblade 2, in some regard, effectively has the same thing, because just think about all the stuff that we have in order to modify our characters with. Just between the driver and blade, you have a bunch to worry about, but you've got driver arts, you've got driver affinity, so for their specific affinity chart. You have the accessories that each one could have. You have pouch items to further improve specific stats. You've got the blade weapon type. Is it a spear or a sword? You've got the core chips. You've got blade affinity that once it's built up, as well as what that allows for a given blade to be unique. You've got the aux cores in case you want to do something like the accessories for the drivers. There are a ton of ways to customize, and they effectively compel you to customize by virtue of giving you very few overdrive protocols, as well as throwing a gacha system in to say, hey, you want the super rare stuff? You're gonna have to work for it. So in that respect, the gacha system I imagine could be rather annoying, and by my understanding, on release it was obnoxious as hell, by virtue of the fact that characters like Cosmos are just so rare and they don't give you a whole lot of options. Oh, and the fact that they had to effectively hand you a bunch of legendary core crystals just built into the expansion pass, the fact that they had to add in some more consistent blades like Corvin in order to effectively say, oi, I want to make sure that you're actually able to have a minimum level of power. So given that, I do wonder about that, because the reason why I think that's important to specify is that the same problem that you run into Three Houses is the same problem that you run into with this game. Because the problem when you give the player that much customization option, that many options to mix and match to try all sorts of strategies out, the problem you run into is that on one hand, it is a min-maxer's dream. But on the other hand, you have a circumstance where, hey, there needs to be at least a baseline that we can trust as far as game balance is concerned. And that becomes much harder. And they sort of get around this by having the pity system, where even if you've been horrifically unlucky with the blades that you've been getting, you'll at least get a specific few. And that was put in even before Corvin was released, if I'm not mistaken. That's something that was in the release version. And so by virtue of that, I'm sat here going, the fact that you even had to put that system in, I suspect says everything that needs to. And the other problem there is that you don't necessarily know who's going to get all of this. So I ended up in a situation where Rex and Nia had a fair amount, and, well, that ended up working out well for them, but then it turned out, oh, we've got Zeke and Morg that I have to worry about, and they just don't have as many options. At least until I can build up overdrive protocols. And then, when it comes time for me to finally do New Game Plus, and I'm going in with Bringer of Chaos, I'm thinking, oh, wait, Corvin's probably going to be required for this. Unfortunately, I put him on Zeke. I'm not going to get him back for a while. Oh god, we're in trouble. So from a balance standpoint, it becomes much harder to judge, because there's going to be all sorts of varying levels of power from the player depending on what they chose to experiment with, how much they've actually been able to grasp of all the game mechanics that are layered on top of each other. And it makes it really hard to tell if this game actually is properly balanced or not. And in case my Tears of the Kingdom review back in, well, this will probably release not a year or two ago. I'm recording this, well, to give you a sense for how long it's going to take to edit all this, June 7th, 2024 is when I'm recording this. So, and a little over a month, well, a little under a month ago, I put out a video on Tears of the Kingdom. So, and it's another, well, as I said there, game balance, because I'm someone who comes from a strategy game and RPG niche, because that's where I spend most of my time. For the most part, I'm using game balance as my primary metric to judge gameplay, at least once we get past things like user interface and all the rest, and whether or not it actually controls properly. So, my main metric for judging gameplay is effectively useless to me given how things have turned out. I forgot about that part. So, by virtue of that, it's hard for me to tell whether or not this game actually does hold up from a gameplay standpoint because there just are so many variables at play. I mean, the fact that it was recommended that I not even worry about side quests, which meant that there was a ton within a pretty much every Blade Affinity chart, including the main characters that just went completely neglected, and yet I was still able to burn down still able on normal mode to go through and burn down the final battle in one try. It took me 3 on this one, and I was maxed out to hell and back. Though, to be fair, I didn't have to, well, to be fair, I was a little unlucky at one part, but still. Even so, it wasn't as if it was all that challenging after all the bullshit I had to deal with in the challenge battles, so here we are. So, the only thing that I can really say for certain is that, hey, even though it's, well, because of how difficult it is to properly judge the game balance, the other issue is that it's incredibly hard to judge, well, it's hard to tell if... Let me put it this way, the user interface does not do this game any favors, because, again, I'm coming from a strategy game and RPG niche where I'm used to CRPGs. I'm used to stuff like Baldur's Gate. I'm used to stuff like Pillars of Eternity. I'm used to stuff like Diablo. That is, generally speaking, where my niche ends up lying, within that general area. So, by virtue of that, that's the kind of interface I'm used to where, okay, I need to know at a glance what exactly this is going to do relative to what this is going to do. And to be fair, I'm used to keyboard and mouse, I'm used to PC gaming, and there is a hell of a lot more that you can do as far as controls. I have a lot more buttons on my keyboard than I do on my Switch controller. So, you have a lot more options for the sake of getting through a user interface, at least navigating through it more quickly. But by virtue of that, well, here we are. So I'm used to stuff that tends to have a fair number of hotkeys, well, at least more hotkeys, and because I can navigate through with a mouse, I'm not having to worry as much about, okay, so I need to hit this button in order to back out, this button. I'm not having to worry about nested menus. I have more of it laid out on the screen than otherwise. So, by virtue of that, there's already a bit where, okay, it is definitely a difference in perspective because this is what I'm used to. But at the same time, there are certain things that I feel could be greatly improved because the fact that I mentioned earlier that there are just so many ways to modify a character, it's hard to tell at a glance, okay, if modifying this one, well, will modifying this one thing over here actually have a tangible effect on the results I'm seeing against Battle Y? And that's the problem that you run into, to where I think a line that I've used, or will be using in a review soon, is that this is a game where you need either the internet or weaponized autism to figure your way around it if you dare try Bringer of Chaos out, because it seems like, again, to draw a comparison to Three Houses, they decided to go the route of, hey, you know how we're going to balance this? Normal mode will have a general baseline. There'll probably be a few difficulty spikes in there by virtue of a few battles like the end of Chapter 4 that will act as a skill check. But then for Bringer of Chaos, where we're going to stack all these other things on it, we're basically going to go the mentality of, F it, we ball. You're just gonna have to figure it out. You're gonna have to just struggle. You'll find a way. And to be fair, you look online for all sorts of neat strategies and whatnot, you can find all sorts of really cool stuff in there. The fact that the hardest challenge battle in the game, 9th Imperial Armored Division, can be burned down in a minute and a half, if you know what you're doing. I could never get those builds to work properly, so I ended up defaulting to just barreling through with brute force, but hey, it worked, so I can't complain. Although there were, as you saw in the earlier montage, depending on whether that ends up in this video or somewhere else. Still, it did get through, it did get done, but yeah, it's a situation where if you're trying to play this without the internet, you're going to be in trouble if you want to go any form of completionist, especially considering that there's no way to properly delineate, okay, I have these specific monsters I need to take out in order to work on blade affinity for Blade X. And, oh hey Statesman, you're just settling in? I'm gonna be loud for a while, hope you don't mind. Anyway, so you have specific monsters that you have to go kill, and you know, generally speaking, that they are in this region. The problem is that the game doesn't really tell you they show up at this time of day, in this particular weather, or anything relating to that. And so there's a fair number of unique monsters that, in order to find them for the sake of just burning them down to go full completionist in this, I effectively had to go looking stuff up, because there wasn't an easy way to do it. It would have also been nice to have something like, say, similarly to how you have the side quest marker, if you could just highlight a specific blade affinity node, if you aren't going to use that format. I also think it would be good to have it at a glance sheet that's a little more detailed than what you have just on the panel in the bottom right, but never mind me. It would be good to be able to highlight a panel and say mark as active, because then you can say, alright, I need to kill this particular monster, I need to find this unique monster, tell me where I need to go. Make it easy on me to where I'm not having... I'm already going to have to explore a fair amount in order to see the things like collectibles and monsters and unique landmarks and all the rest. Don't make it harder on me. Don't make it to where I have to have an internet browser up with my capture card set up on my Switch unironically being a boon. It should not reach that point. So that, I feel, is a major drawback for this game, in that if you want to explore this in any level of depth, you're effectively compelled to have a guide or a wiki to hand, which I feel is a major drawback. So in that respect, gameplay-wise, I'm leaning more toward negative as far as that's concerned. But then again, that is also because, bearing in mind, I mean, we've spent, 330 hours in this save? A lot of that has been, a fair amount of that has been more of the tedious stuff lately. A matter of, okay, for Vess and Ursula, I have to go collectible hunting in the former to just repeat the same node over and over and eventually get to where I need to. And then for the latter, I'm having to constantly send her into Merc missions over and over until eventually it maxes out. So, throwing that into the picture, it's... yeah, not my cup of tea. So, in terms of gameplay, there's potential with the system they came up with, but this ain't it. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. So, gameplay, 6 out of 10 at most. I'm gonna be that guy. So, probably a much more controversial opinion after I've thrown so much time at it, but either way, luckily the story component was stronger. There are certainly points that you can criticize where the main story to some extent falls apart. I will repeat the criticism I made in Chapter 1, where if Jin wanted to end the story before it began, he could have. Because you show him being able to move at the speed of light, and then the moment Azurta shows up to rescue Rex and Pyra, his first thought is, oh crap, they actually have a means to escape now. Alright, shut it down, murk Rex, subdue Pyra, get him out of here, take down Azurta. He should have been able to do that. The fact that he didn't, you can argue, by virtue of the fact that, hey, he doesn't actually want to die as was described here. So you have that as somewhat a defense, that he's not in any hurry to get himself killed. But at the same time, especially since getting himself killed is basically a guaranteed path with the path he's on, a guaranteed outcome. But that is a flimsy defense by virtue of the fact that he is still going on the path. So there are absolutely points like that, but the world building, though, ended up being fascinating. So that ended up being what buoyed it up, because now that I have had time to go through all the side quests, it has been interesting to look at all that. Because you have instances where, hey, we're not going to have the Empire faction be ontologically evil. There's going to be a fair amount of depth to them, where, yes, they are an imperial power, and there are all sorts of moral conundrums that spawn as a result of that, but the problem is, they've got mouths to feed, and their current land isn't doing that, so you can hardly blame them for being territorial in that regard. I kind of wish that they had shown more of the, quote, imperial powers that Morardain had that would have marked them as an empire before then, unless it was an imperial power within Morardain at some point, which is possible, I suppose, but still. Either way, so you have that, and then, as a result of that, it's not completely negative for Gormoth's side either. Because, yes, there are people who get worked like, well, are driven around like slaves effectively, or at least indentured servants, by virtue of the fact that, hey, I'm so busy with my work, I can't even go to check if my son is okay. Yeah, that's awful. But at the same time, you end up realizing that, yeah, as corrupt as the consul was, he actually was still governing to where, after however many years, Gormoth had started to take for granted the kind of effort that was required, to where you have an entire side quest chain making sure that, hey, let's make sure that everybody's actually good to go here. Let's make sure that we actually are seeing to everyone's needs and wants. So you end up with a lot of fascinating stuff there, and in that respect, I can't think of too many issues with the world building or characterization for the world leaders. A matter of everybody going, okay, so that is your perspective, that's how you generally prefer things. Alright, cool, I dig it. You make sense. So there's very little that doesn't work as far as the world building is concerned, especially when you know more about how the world came to be. There is a bit of ambiguity that could result as by virtue of the fact that, okay, hang on, the conduit can somehow split you body and soul in half. I mean, sure, you are the locus of this, and to be fair, Mayneth got thrown, or I guess, who was it? Galea got thrown over effectively whole cloth. There is theory crafting that she ended up being that monster we fought down in the land of Mortha within Fallen Torna, but still, I don't know if that was ever confirmed, and given the nature of the assets in this game, it's not necessarily a guarantee, and arguably even then, it's the mind being thrown to Xenoblade 1's world and the body being left behind, but still. There's a fair amount of fascinating stuff within all that, so story ends up buoying it up. So story I'd give an 8. Somewhere in that ballpark. Maybe a 7 if I'm feeling especially cynical. Because there are certainly problems with the main story, but the world building buoys it up, and the side quests do a good job at fleshing it out. If I were being a cynical bastard, I could knock it down to a 7 by virtue of I understand what they were going for with the rare blades, but so many of them are just generic, well, not even generic caricatures to be fair, but so many of them are such caricatures to where it's hard to take them seriously. You're sat there going, okay, what kind of person imprinted on you to cause this particular manifestation? This is weird. So, in that respect, the rare blades didn't do it for me. The world building did, though. So, in that respect, yeah, I'd say it held up relatively well. So, definitely a flawed little game. Unsurprising that Xenoblade 3 didn't do as well as this one, given the timing on it, because if memory serves, Xenoblade 2 released, 2017? So that would have been pretty close to the Switch's launch time. And so people would be looking for basically anything, and so they would latch onto a JRPG that is more niche. And because of the state of this game, it would not at all surprise me that, hey, here are the people who returned for, well, either returned or, well, returned actually in either sense, whether they played the Wii version or not, or any of the other versions of Xenoblade 1. Here are the people who returned for that, and then here's who showed up for Xenoblade 3. The sales figures make a fair amount of sense to me in that regard. Still, either way, I suppose that's all that I really want to say on it, though I've been told the title screen has something different about it now. So, let's take a look real quick. Alright, there we are. I think I have actually seen this just in a clip before, but we'll let it play for a bit. Oh yeah, we're moving around a little bit. Ah, I see. Ah, okay. Fair enough. Interesting. I wonder why it's different this time. Whatever the case may be, there we are. So, I guess that's where we call it. Given the timing on this video, I think for my sake, chronologically, there's one more thing to see too, as I promised a lore talk video, well, a lore talk stream, I should say, after I was done with this, which in my time will be a week from now. But, well, as far as Xenoblade is done on this channel, well, Xenoblade 2 is done on this channel, here we are. And given that I've got, what, this is session 96 as far as the Let's Play content, so my expectation, it would not at all surprise me if I've already begun playing through Xenoblade 3 by the time that I've seen to all this. So, it's, although, if things really don't work out, there's even a possibility that I'm finished with Xenoblade 3, although given that I won't have to worry about New Game Plus as much for that game, given the circumstance, given my understanding of it, I guess we'll see, won't we? So, either way, no sense speculating on what comes next. I do have a couple of ideas to replace this game as far as Let's Play content, but there's no use speculating on it over much until we are closer to that day. After all, who knows where I'll be in a year or two. All sorts to think about, all sorts to think about. Still, for now, thank you for joining me on this very long-winded journey, and the next time I jump into Xenoblade, I suppose we'll be back to the live streams, if anything. Who knows, maybe I'll be able to finish both X and 3 by the time I'm finished with this. Who knows? We'll see. We'll see. For now, thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you all later.